And joining us now, Michael Landsberg, host of TSN's Off the Record. It's great to have you here.
Great to be here. First time on the show.
First time on this program, that's right.
That's why I came out of the closet with my mental illness, just so I could get on the show.
That's not why, but we're grateful that you came in to talk about this, and I tell you why I wanted to have you in. How long have I known you?
Since we met in the, I believe at the doors of Varsity Stadium, where you and I had been put together to broadcast a Varsity Blues football game when I was in third year U of T, just about to fail out, and you were in second year U of T, just about to go on to do your master's degree.
And that was 1979, I think.
I had no idea what year it was.
It was a long time ago.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I raise this is because the point is I've known you a long time. And I never knew that you were fighting with mental health issues practically your whole life. And I want to start with that. How were you able to disguise from everybody that you knew, including those of us who spent a lot of time with you back then, what you were going through?
Well, don't make the assumption that because I disguised it from you, I disguised it from everyone. There may have been people that were closer to me that I let into.
Not possible.
Maybe a few, including my wife and not my parents.
Your parents did not know?
My parents did not know. Now, when you say that I had suffered throughout my entire life, or almost my entire life, the truth is that I never knew that I was, quote unquote, mentally ill. It's an interesting awakening when that happens, when you realize I'm crazy.
When did you know that?
Well, I suffered from anxiety as a kid, right? And I had these ridiculous fears, things that I would never tell anyone, because that's something I'd actually be embarrassed about. I mean, they were ludicrous and absurd. And I thought that everybody experienced those, because when you're a kid, you believe whatever is in your head is the norm, right? And that's one of the reasons why kids need to know that maybe they're not the norm, and maybe there is help there. And I probably could have used it at that point. But,
Well,
you know,
give me, for instance, what would you have?
I was afraid of throwing up, desperately afraid of puking.
For no particular reason?
Well, in my head there were reasons. And I had this enormous fear of it, to the point where I was a counselor at a day camp and I wouldn't go on the bus, because I rightfully had sized up the fact that kids get bus sick on the bus. Mm-hmm. So I was consumed by that, right? And I would live in fear of, am I sick? Will I get sick? If you get sick, will I catch it?
Did you tell anybody?
It was kind of, I don't remember if I told anyone. It was kind of, everybody knew that, but I don't think anyone knew the extent to which I feared it. Interestingly, my son Corey has exactly the same fear as that. Exactly.
And he's how old now?
He's 25.
And he suffers that anxiety as well.
Exactly the same one. And subsequent to talking about this, I think I've met maybe 6 people, 7 people who have exactly the same fear. They actually have it's something dria, right? Like there is actually a real fear of it.
So if you have this thing, does that mean that you suffer from a particular mental illness?
Well, I suffered from what you would call general anxiety disorder, but I didn't call it general anxiety disorder. I called it, in my own head, sort of being a loser kid who's got all of these ridiculous fears. And I started to realize, I think in my late teens, that maybe not everybody fears this the same way, and maybe not everyone has the same level of anxiety. So that was me as a kid, and I didn't come to my issue with depression until later in life. And I think that, I know you've been exploring this issue, but I think that there's pretty well agreement in the medical community that anxiety and depression really stem from the same area. It's not like you can do a blood test and say, oh, Landsberg's 80% depressed and 20% anxious. Mm-hmm. You know, it's some kind of imbalance in your brain that manifests itself sometimes as anxiety and sometimes as depression.
When did the light go on when you realized, my goodness, I am clinically depressed?
14 years ago, the start of Off the Record, 1997, the fall of 97, I started to realize that who I was no longer who I was. And there's a slow recognition. Like, I knew that I was really in pain. And when I say in pain, it's difficult to understand the kind of pain I'm talking about unless you've experienced it, right? And that's not to be exclusionary and say, you know, I felt stuff that you haven't felt. But pain is the right word.
Is it physical?
It can be physical, but it's this pain that goes to your core. And that really is very difficult to verbalize. And that's why it's healthy for guys like me to do a show like this, because, you know, you go to, on the internet, and you Google symptoms of depression, and you'll see weight loss or weight gain, fatigue during the day, inability to sleep, loss of appetite. I had some weight loss for sure, but...
You told me you were on a diet, and that's why you lost all that weight.
It's good that you can make fun of my mental illness.
No, I'm not making fun.
I'm sizing you up. I'm kidding. Of course, I make fun of my own.
But I remember, you were a chubbier kid.
I was a fat kid.
And then I was being nice.
We weren't being that nice. I mean, if you want to be really nice, you wouldn't have mentioned the chubby part. No. But to finish what I was saying, you Google symptoms of depression, and you see this list. But depression isn't about a symptom. Depression is about a feeling. And unless you felt it, then nobody at home's going to go, well, that's me. Like this is, I call it the that's me awareness, where you're watching a show like this and you go, wow, that's me.
That's me.
I understand what he's talking about. So
is it the proverbial, you feel like you're living under a black cloud?
yeah, for sure. You know, black cloud, or you're in this big dark hole, and you know when you wake up in the morning that no matter what happens over the course of the day, you will go to bed sad, that nothing will happen over the course of the day that will change that. And you believe that you will be that way the rest of your life, right? Even though, you know, reasonable intelligence, you know that there's antidepressants. I'm talking about the first time that you experience it. You know that potentially there's help, but part of the problem is this vicious cycle, is that you feel these symptoms of depression, you feel this sadness, and your ability to motivate yourself, A, to get help, and B, to realize that there is light at the end of the tunnel, is taken away from you because of your depression. So it's like one feeds the other, and back and forth you go, and before you know it, you're living in a place that you didn't know existed before, and you don't know how to get out of it.
How did you hide this from your parents?
Well, I mean, at that point, I was no longer living in my parents' house.
But what did your dad do for a living?
My dad was an orthodontist.
So he was in the medical field.
Right, but you see, what do you do for a living? You are, I mean, I'll answer the question. Obviously, you host a show, but you're a professional actor as well, right? You will act in a certain way hosting this show that you may not feel, right?
Not too much. I think one of the reasons this job works for me is because I'm kind of this way here and I'm this way when the cameras are
Yeah,
not on also.
but I mean, you can be talking to a guest and you may not find the guest that interesting, but you'll act interested. You may not feel, you may be worried about one of your children on a given day.
Okay,
but
I get you.
So you have a Steve Paikin that you have to present, and whether you don't feel like that one, you have to lift yourself up.
So you did that.
Yeah. So I became really good at being a professional deceiver.
Now, at this point, are you on any medication at all?
I'm not on any medication. So 1997 turns to 1998, and eventually I realize that, you know, I'm in bad shape, that I have no quality of life, that the things that brought me joy were no longer bringing me joy.
Your wife, Karen, knew.
And my wife, Karen, knew.
What did she tell you to do?
She told me to get help.
And did you?
I eventually got help, yeah. I mean, you have to take a step in your life, in your own realization, to go to see a psychiatrist. And you know, to me, I say it all the time. I see a psychiatrist, and there's something very freeing about that, right? Because when you keep it inside, and this is really important to someone who may be watching who's thinking, well, that could be me. When you keep it inside, you send yourself this signal that somehow this is your fault. Because you would never hesitate to see, you know, I got a terrible pain in my side. You never go, well, I'm not gonna go to a doctor. It could be appendix. I don't want anyone to know that, right? You would never hesitate to tell me, last month you were off work because of pneumonia, right? You wouldn't be embarrassed.
Right.
So when you keep it inside, when you don't tell people that you see a psychiatrist or on your medication or you suffer from depression, then you've sent yourself the signal that this is your fault. And that is a bad place to be.
I wonder if part of this is because you inhabit a world filled with tough macho jocks. And to acknowledge any kind of weakness, regardless of what it might be, regardless of how legitimate, is unacceptable in that world.
Unacceptable? I think it's unacceptable in every world, especially for men. 80%,
but especially in the jock world.
I mean, the stats are 80% of men that suffer from depression never get help. 60% of women never get help. So, I mean, there are people, and I've spoken to people in our generation who will say, oh, you know, my dad, I know he was depressed for his whole life, but he never got help. Because you didn't do that, right? And especially if you were an adult in the 50s and the 60s, you didn't have the license to say, you know, I'm hurting deep down, because that was an admission of weakness. And at a certain point, especially for the father of the family, you weren't allowed to be weak. But, you know, I never bought into that. I always thought, you know, mention it all I can. God bless me for getting the sympathy, right? Oh, poor me. I mean, it's interesting that we all use our illnesses and our weaknesses and the things that are heaped upon us sometimes to get sympathy, right? But people don't do that with mental illness. We were watching a TV show once, and this was recently, and I said something. My wife was watching with me, and I said, "Wow, that guy's a mental case. That guy's crazy." And I kind of went overboard. She goes, "Well, that's not very nice." I go, "Hello, I can say it. I'm a mental case too, right?"
But you're not. I mean,
well, but see, that's what's interesting is I am a functional, happy, blessed person who happens to suffer from this chemical imbalance that hits me. Unless it's treated, it will keep coming back and keep coming back.
all right, so you went for the treatment. Presumably, The doctor said, we're going to try to work out some medical
Right.
response to this?
Yes.
And you started to test different doses and levels of medicine, that kind
I
of thing?
left my doctor's office with the prescription. I went downstairs into the pharmacy. I filled a prescription, bought a bottle of water, and took the pill right there. When you acknowledge the fact that you're sick and that you're hurting, and then someone says to you, you know, there may be help here in this prescription or with this drug, you have to be an idiot not to go, give it to me, right?
So you took it.
So I took it, and I was miserable. I get what you would call a paradoxical response. So I start on the drug, and I'm 8 out of 10 depressed, and for 4 days, I'm 10 out of 10 depressed. It gets worse. But then, you know, it gets better. And at 10 days, see the whole group of drugs, Prozac or Zoloft or Effexor, slightly different group, they all work over the course of a couple of weeks, right? Which is incredibly incredibly horrible when you think that people take their own lives over that course of that period of time, right? It's not the drug that you can go to and say, well, it now works. And I was miserable. And then one day, my wife and I went to a restaurant, and I excused myself. I said, I have to go to the washroom, right? And from the time I walked to the front to the time I walked to the back, I went, oh my God, I think I feel better. It was the greatest awakening. It was almost worth the depression before to feel the relief, right? You know, it's like, you go to the dentist and all you can think about is feeling better. And when you do, you go, wow, this is unbelievable. You know, my mouth doesn't hurt anymore. Well, for me, it was my soul doesn't hurt anymore.
You literally, from the time you got up from the table to before you made it to the bathroom,
Right.
you felt the cloud lift.
I felt the cloud lift. Well put.
Did you know how to react when that
Yeah, I
feeling
went and
came
peed
upon you?
anyway. Oh,
I was looking for something a little more profound than that.
well, I mean, there was a purpose for me going to the washroom. But, you know, I see, here's the cycle that guys like me always go through. And there will be people watching who are nodding their head going, yeah, absolutely. So you make the commitment to go on the drug, and you can't wait for the drug to work. And when the drug works, you celebrate your return to reasonable mental health. See, the thing about depression is that it involves everything. It's all encompassing. You can't say, well, you know, this little bit of my life is good, but everything else is bad. But I still have this. Everything is bad. The things that I love the most, which would certainly be my family, all of a sudden, I love them just as much, but they didn't bring me the joy that I got before. And you pretend, I mean, you can't go to your kid, you know, hey, you know, you're showing me your artwork, you know, you know, to be honest with you, I'm really in a bad place right now, and it kind of sucks. So you pretend like, yeah, oh, that's great, and you have to act a certain way. But so you go through the cycle. When you feel better, you feel so good.
When did the restaurant event happen? How long ago was that?
That was 14 years ago, right? So that was the first time I went on medication, 13 years ago.
And you've got the dose right now. Do you take medicine anymore?
So this is part of the cycle.
Okay.
So you go on it, you feel better, you celebrate this, and you go, you know what, I don't care about the side effects. It doesn't matter to me. I have been given back this gift of the ability to feel happiness, which without it, nothing is good, and with it, most things are good. Most simple things are good. So then you celebrate it, but then, you know, so I'm happy and I don't care about the side effects,
What are
right?
they?
The side effects, there's a million, depending on who you are. But I mean, these are
you have
heavy duty, yeah, absolutely. These are heavy duty drugs.
What'd you have?
These are heavy, for instance, just before I came here, I fell asleep on the couch. So I get crushingly tired sometimes during the day, or I shouldn't say sometimes. So, I mean, nobody wants to be on drugs. You know, when they say medication is overprescribed, I mean, maybe it is, but when you need it, you need it. So here's my joy, and here's how I don't care about the side effects. And then gradually you go, well, you know, was I really that sick? Did I really feel that bad? And man, I hate falling asleep in the afternoon, and I hate all these other things. And before you know it, you go, wow, all I can think about is the fact that these side effects are affecting me, and I couldn't have been that sick. So you go off the drug.
And did you?
I did.
For how long?
I think probably a couple of years. I mean, now we're getting to the point where I don't really remember which time or which.
What did you do when you were off the meds?
I did fine at first, and eventually I relapsed, and eventually I went crawling on not my hands and knees, but the equivalent of what would be the metaphoric hands and knees to the doctor, and said, you know, like, give me the drugs, right? You know, it's not like you're an addict, because these drugs are non-addictive, but you are addicted to the feeling of mental health, right? So it's like, give me the drug, write the prescription. And I went downstairs, filled it again, and felt better. But that cycle is enormously common. And it takes, because a lot of people get depressed once in their life and never get depressed again. So they go off the medication and they're fine. That wasn't me.
So you will probably be on meds for the rest of your life.
Thanks, Doc. Yeah,
Is that right?
absolutely.
And you're fine with that?
You know what I'm not fine with? Depression. You know what I'm not fine with? Is that feeling in the morning where you go, the most profound feeling that I have when I'm depressed, here it is. I'm sitting here with you on your show, and all I can think about is, I can't wait to get out of here. I can't wait to get out of here. And then I get out of here and I go home and I go, wow, I can't wait to get out of here. And you keep being chased by this shadow that's hanging over your shoulder called depression to another place. Because somehow being around people is so painful. And eventually you end up in bed, and that's the only place it's the only place where you have no other place to go to from. Well, maybe there's one place, which is part of the tragedy of the illness, right? But, you know, for me, that's the most profound feeling. Get away from wherever you are.
In our last minute then.
Last minute?
Yeah, time flies when you're having fun, eh?
Yeah, I'm glad my depression's brought you joy. See, I can say that because we're buddies, right?
But in our last minute, for the guy who's watching right now and who, after hearing your story, says, holy cow, that's me, what's the advice?
The advice is, and I'll ignore you and talk to
go ahead.
the guy that acknowledges that, because I talked about this on Off the Record before, and the responses I got were, you know, at least maybe 24 responses, all from men, all saying that they experienced this awakening. So I'm talking to you. If what I'm saying, forget about the weight loss and all the other symptoms that you Google and you find out. If you have this sense of wherever you are, you don't want to be. If you have this sense that what you were is no longer what you are, then there is help. But more than anything, you owe it to yourself to get help. And more than anything, you owe it to yourself to share this with somebody else, because this is not your fault. Some of the most famous, rugged individuals in history, Winston Churchill, called it his black dog. He is arguably the greatest leader of the 20th century, one of the toughest, mentally toughest men. So if his depression was not brought on by weakness, then why would yours be? This isn't your fault. This is the luck of the draw, and there is help. And the moment you decide to share with someone, you'll feel better. A little bit, but you'll feel better.
You're a pro because you can take account. Michael, I'm so glad that you're doing so well. And we're really glad you came into TVO tonight to talk about it. Thanks so much.
Thank you for having me.